In high school, you learned how to rationalize the denominator of a fraction. And there were two rules that you were introduced to. The first being, if we have a fraction of the format 1 over root x, to rationalize this fraction, we are going to multiply it by the denominator over itself. Once we multiply the numerators together, we now have square root x in the numerator. In the denominator, square root x times square root x gives us x. Now, what was the aim of this? When we say that we need to rationalize the denominator, we mean that ultimately we want to get rid of the surd from the denominator. So notice at the start we had 1 over square root x. We now have square root x over x. So by applying this rule, we've got rid of the surd from the denominator. Now, the second rule that you learned was that if your denominator has two terms in it, say for example we have 1 over square root x plus 1. To rationalize this denominator, we are going to multiply by the denominator over itself. However, we are going to change the sign in between the two terms. So we're going to multiply by square root x minus 1 over square root x minus 1. Multiplying the numerators together, we have the square root x minus 1 all over. And when we multiply the denominators, we've got a binomial times a binomial. We can apply the FOIL method. So we have square root x times square root x, which gives us x. We've got square root x times negative 1, which is negative root x. We've got positive 1 times square root x, which is positive square root x. And positive 1 times negative 1, which is negative 1. Now you will notice that you have two terms of the opposite sign, so they can cancel out with each other. And what we are left with is the square root x minus 1 all over x minus 1. So notice that by applying this rule, we have managed to get rid of the surd from the denominator. Now, let's apply this to an example. So, say that we have the limit as x approaches a positive 1 for x minus 1 all over the square root of x squared plus 24 minus 5. Now, we know that our first step towards rationalizing is to multiply this fraction by the denominator over itself. However, seeing that we now have two terms in our denominator, we are going to change the sign of the second term. So we're going to use plus 5. Our next step is for us to multiply the numerators together and then multiply the denominators together. Now, when we multiply the numerators, I'm just going to keep them in brackets. There's no need to multiply them out at this point. And we'll see why a little later. When we multiply the denominators, so we can use the FOIL method since we have a binomial times a binomial. Now, from the rule that we've learned, we know that we are going to have two terms that will cancel out with each other. So if you know how to apply the rule, you're most welcome to do it that way. If not, and you want to multiply out to see exactly what cancels out, you can do that as well. We're going to have the square root times itself. The square roots are going to cancel out with each other. We are left with x squared plus 24. We have the square root times positive 5. So that's plus 5 times the square root. We have minus 5 times the square root, so that's minus 5 times the square root. It's plus 24. And we have negative 5 times positive 5, which is negative 25. Now, at this point, you'll notice that your two terms that have the opposite sign will cancel out with each other. Let's simplify what we have. So the numerator will stay as is at the moment. Simplifying the denominator, we're going to be left with x squared minus 1. So we had plus 24, minus 25. That gives us negative 1. Now our next step is to factorize wherever possible. So notice that your denominator is in the format of difference of two squares. So that has to be factorized. Now to factorize the denominator with difference of two squares, we know one bracket gets x plus 1, the other bracket gets x minus 1. The x minus 1 at the top and at the bottom cancel out with each other. We can now make use of the limit. Now, actually, you can write out what you have left, but if you want to make use of the limit immediately, then remember that since we will be using the limit, there's no need for us to write it on the left-hand side. So we're going to take that 1 and substitute in place of x. So we're going to have the square root of 1 squared plus 24 plus 5 all over 1 plus 1. So we can simplify. Under the square root, 1 squared is 1. 1 plus 24 is 25. In the denominator, we have 2. We know that square root of 25 is 5. Simplifying the numerator, we have 10 over 2. And our final answer is 5. So we will look at a few more examples in the next video.